Welcome, everyone, to the ninth installment of Eat, Drink, Vote. I'm Liz Moran-Stelk. I serve as the Executive Director of the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, and I'll be your host today. We have a stellar lineup of visionary women I'm so excited to hear from. This is the ninth of 9 weekly web discussions we've had in the lead up to Election Day, which is next week, just 1 week away. As many of you know, we're an alliance of farmers and eaters who use our voices and our choices to build a more just and regenerative local food system. Voting is just one important way you can use your voice. To help you cast an informed choice on November 3rd, we solicited inputs from members at our annual meeting in February, interviewed leaders, and worked with local and national partners to create a food and farm candidate questionnaire with 9 of the most pressing issues facing farmers and eaters across Illinois. We sent that questionnaire to all 50 candidates running for Congress and running for U.S. House and Senate in Illinois. You can view the voter guide before you vote at ilstewards.org/2020 voter guide. If you don't see your candidates' responses, you can urge them to reply by following the directions on our website. Before we begin, though, I'd just like to take us a minute to recognize the original caretakers of this land. Given the many geographies we're listening in from today, I ask you to open the native land map that we're going to link to in the chat. Please find your location and the communities that once cared for the unceded land on which you reside today. I ask you to critically think about this for a moment. This map is not perfect, it's eternally incomplete, and may leave out or misrepresent Indigenous people and the intricacies of their territory. Also, this is just a moment and acknowledgement. It does not absolve us from years of complicitness, and it does not rebuild the lives of Indigenous peoples. These lands that we live and work on are the ancestral homes of Indigenous people that were forcibly removed, executed, and robbed of their traditions. And yet, even when faced with unthinkable circumstances, they're here and thriving. I ask you to join me in taking a moment to consider the ways you can take action in your community to support Indigenous people. Thank you. All right, let's get started. So we asked, as I mentioned, congressional candidates in the voter guide. This was the last question. What will you do to support and ensure equitable access to nutritious foods, protection for food chain workers, and a more resilient local food supply during the ongoing crisis and for potential future crises? Our conversation today will shed light on our vision for a post-COVID food system and how candidates responded to this question. Let me introduce Dr. J, a physician and co-founder of Black Oak Center for Renewable Sustainable Living and Health Food Hub, joining us from Pembroke, Illinois. Aasia Castaneda, Community Partnership Manager at CIFPAC, the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, joining us from Chicago. Karen Lehman, Director of Fresh Taste, also typically in Chicago, but today joining us from Minneapolis. And Jennifer Paulson, the Executive Director at FoodWorks, joining us from Carbondale. I'd like each of you to start with a brief introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and your work in the food system? I'm going to ask if Dr. J, if you can start.
Yes, good afternoon. I am the president and co-founder of Black Oak Center for Sustainable Renewable Living, and I'm also a farmer and a family physician.
Aasia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aasia Mohammed Castaneda. I'm the Community Partnerships Manager. I am a daughter of immigrants, descendant of farmers. I work to amplify Brown and Black leaders in the food system and build solidarity. I work for the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. We co-facilitate, advocate, and implement policies that advance food justice and food sovereignty in Chicago. We fight for more just and equitable practices in the food system. And currently, if you go to our Instagram, our CIFPAC staff are at action at the Mars Candy factory here in Chicago, because Mars factory is not systemically denying their workers basic protections and fair wages in the middle of a pandemic. So we're working with a few partners on that, but I wanted to amplify those efforts in the protection of those workers.
Karen and then Jen.
Hey everybody, I'm Karen Lehman. As Liz mentioned, I direct Fresh Taste, and I'm wearing a couple of other hats here. Fresh Taste is a funder initiative in Chicago focused on relocalizing the food system in the Chicago food shed, improving equity in the food system. And in addition, we are managing the Chicago Region Food System Fund, which is a COVID response fund, now moving into a resilience phase. So this is an excellent conversation to be part of today. And I also am on the steering committee of a national funder network called Funders for Regenerative Agriculture, which was created to pull together the innovative, wonderful work going on in regenerative agriculture as a climate solution and water quality protection approach. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, I'm Paulson. I'm the executive director of FoodWorks. We work in Southern Illinois, and our mission is to grow the sustainable food economy here. We come from a place of believing that local farms and small farms are going to do a better job taking care of our communities, taking care of our land, and keeping us resilient and being able to feed ourselves. So we do that through a variety of programs. And I also say I come to this work as an eater, not a farmer. I very much I'm so grateful for all of the work that the farmers do to bring us this food to our community. So there we go.
Thanks, Jen. I'm so glad to have this panel of women from across the state, top to bottom, to look at a resilient food system. And if you're following along at home or the office, please take a look at the Food and Farm Voter Guide at ilstewards.org/2020 voter guide. For folks who love local food and sustainable agriculture, there's long been an evolution of the words and concepts that we use to describe the food system that would be really good for people and the planet. More than ever in the last 7 months, we've heard the word resilient to describe the kind of food system and the economy that we really need. So can you all lay it out for us? What is a resilient food system? And I'm going to ask Dr. J, can we start with you?
I apologize in advance for giving you a medical analogy, but basically, a resilient food system has redundancy. And so, for instance, if we have coronary artery disease and our coronary arteries are damaged, then literally our body begins to create collateral circulation, what we call collateral circulation. And so that's what a resilient food system would do. It would be able to supply local foods to a local area or a region so that literally vitality can continue. So as we see that the existing system that we've all depended on, the mighty food machine, is having more and more faltering, our local food systems would be able to supply the necessary foods and nutrient needs so that we as a community can continue to stay healthy. So we would have to have lots of local, small and medium-sized farms that have flexibility and would be able to withstand the instability of the climate and still continue to produce, as well as very robust distribution and transportation logistics system so that we can get the local food to the people who need it. And above all, we need to have a really strong demand from the eaters for local foods.
Aasia, can you add to that?
I mean, the only thing I would add, I think Dr. J did a great job of answering the question, is understanding the ways in which we are resilient in terms of our culture and like how the foods reflect that. So the food system has long that centered different types of cultures in its in the food chain supply. And so for me, the work that I'm doing to promote a resilient food system, culturally rooted, culturally appropriate food has to be part of the equation for what is resilient. So yeah, I don't have much else to add to what Dr. J said. I think maybe what I would add is that for resilience to really manifest, that we have to be working in collaboration, and we have to understand the ways in which to operationalize racial equity and shift power and resources. And I just, I do have Braiding Sweetgrass, this book by Robin Kimmerer, a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, and she does have this beautiful metaphor. And maybe I'll read that directly because I don't want to paraphrase, and it's not long. But she talks about massed fruit trees, mass fruiting and fruit trees, in particular like pecans. And there's this understanding if I'm going to read it. If one tree fruits, they all fruit. There are no soloists. Not one tree in a grove, but the whole grove. Not one grove in the forest, but every grove. All across the county and all across the state. The trees act not as individuals, but somehow as a collective. Exactly how they do this, we don't know yet. But what we see is power of unity. What happens to one happens to all. We can starve together or feast together. All flourishing is mutual. So I just love that as an example from nature, as what is resilience, and how we have to work in synchronized way to support each other.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm actually listening to it on audiobooks right now with Robin while Kimmer reading. And so it is just such a wonderful experience. I recommend it to anyone. And the only thing I would add is taking and building on what Aasia just shared is a really, really long view that we are in a long struggle for climate resilience. We are in a long struggle for land access and tenure. And so I think we have to think about resilience as a journey we're on that actually we have many different definitions for, and to be in a place of listening for how different people define resilience and think about it and act on it as we move forward.
Jen?
I don't think there's much I can add. It's, I reiterate what these wonderful women have said. I think that diversity, redundancy, many producers, many avenues to many consumers. That's how we can be resilient, really in the face of whatever it comes, whether it be COVID or an environmental disaster or an economic challenge. We need diversity.
And there's no doubt that what you just described is not what we have right now, what we have today. The pandemic really exposed and even also exacerbated the fragility of the food system. So what are some impacts of the pandemic that you have seen or experienced in the food system over the last 7 months? And Aasia, I'm going to ask if you can start.
What we've seen is that there are so many people unemployed, and that there are so many people that are unemployed that are unable to qualify for benefits, like unemployment and SNAP. So we're seeing this increase in like mutual aid as a form of resilience and organizing. And Chicago mutual aid is super strong, and there are mutual aid networks growing and growing and growing. And I just want to amplify the Chi Nations Youth Council. They have a mutual aid. They're operating as volunteers on a mutual aid effort of 21 people. They have a community garden on Wilson and Pulaski, the First Nations community garden that's like, the only Native American-led community garden in Cook County, and it might be the only one in the state. I know that Whole Chunk and Potawatomi might be consultants on other land trusts, but so we're seeing these pockets of resilience where people are coming together. Chicago Food Policy Action Council, we, March 18th, we started convening all our stakeholders from the city, county, and state levels, along with all our community partners, so Urban Growers Collective, Grow Greater Inglewood, Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. We brought all these folks together, the Heal Food Alliance, to talk about how we need to be resilient in this time to see like where the needs are, and address like some of the areas that were hit most hardest by COVID are Black and Latinx communities on the southwest sides of Chicago. And so we're seeing this like devastating impact, but we're also seeing these pockets of resilience of people coming together to support communities that are impacted. And so it's been, I'm super humbled to be part of such an amazing process and to see so many people coming together to support each other. We're also seeing local growers in Chicago that their CSAs were selling out within days. People were looking to support the local food shed. So, I mean, these are just some of the things. I could go on and on about all the amazing experiences I've had, in the last few months. But this is what we're seeing. We're seeing people really, really interested in investing in the local food shed and coming together. And organizations that weren't doing food justice and food access work, like the Economic Development Strategies Corporation. They've pivoted completely to food access in Little Village and are serving like 10,000 families and have partnered with private companies to support that. This is another thing that we're seeing is that this private-public partnership between nonprofits and companies, Urban Growers Collective and Midwest Foods and Chai Fresh Kitchen, and Chicago Food Policy Action Council, the Centro de Trabajadores Unidos on the southeast side, have all come together to form a squad. And so these are the ways in which we are like, pushing, this resilience and growing it in a way. But, to what Karen said about that, this is like ongoing work. This is a journey. This is part of the journey that we need to understand the timeline in that way.
Well, after the initial disruption this spring in all of our food, our methods of distributing food, that we saw a huge scramble amongst local producers trying to figure out how do they reach consumers when they have this huge disruption. And over the summer, it's been really kind of amazing to see farmers and producers linking up with consumers in all sorts of ways. I could think of 5 farmers off the top of my head that just have a day where they sit in the local grocery store's parking lot and meet up with their customers. But that also really is not sustainable, that each individual producer would be putting in so much effort. Of course, we know producing the food is hard in itself, but to put so much time and effort into that step of reaching the consumer. So, I think I've seen farmers with an online presence doing really well through this. I can think of things like the Leaf online farmers market in Southern Illinois that takes pre-orders and then packages up, and you pick your stuff up once a week. Places like that are doing really well. Other farmers are not, and it's hard to see those folks who are, just like coming into it as a consumer. I know how fatigued people are, and seeing farmers who are struggling with all of the same responsibilities of their families and adapting to this situation, and also trying to run this small business that's tough. It's a tough business. It's really, it's hard. But we've seen also some things like folks finding their ways to find food, especially our SNAP and Link Match programs. We've seen this summer, 35% increase in use of SNAP at farmers markets in Southern Illinois, and the SNAP Match double coupon program. So, you know, it's a mixed bag. And it just kind of, you know, keeps coming back to finding a diversity of ways to reach consumers. And that's what we're trying to do at FoodWorks, is to help bridge that gap between our producers and our consumers. So that's what I've seen.
So I wanted to share with folks that in her response to the voter guide, candidate Betsy Dirksen Londrigan, who's running for the 13th in Central Illinois, said, "We must ensure that the supply chain issues do not lead to food that's destroyed or left to rot, but instead that these products be put to use helping those in need through local food banks and other distribution venues. No one should go hungry while food is wasted because of an inability to get food where it's needed." I know that some of you are doing that work, that really creative rethinking of the food supply chain. So can you tell us, I'm actually going to start with Dr. J. I know you've got a great immunity in the community program and some other work. Can you tell us, what are you doing that moves our community and our food system toward resilience?
Okay. Well, thanks to the Chicago Regional Food System Fund, we were able to acquire the old Whole Foods trolley that was addressing food access challenges in Portland, Oregon in the early 2014, excuse me. And so it's been great because we've been able to take local foods into really high-risk COVID hard-hit areas. My team is out on 91st and Exchange as we speak. And so we're getting the food where it needs to be at affordable prices. We've been out in the rain, in the cold. We've been able to take, as has been referenced, multiple sources of local foods to the community and in local neighborhoods, working with, in collaboration with federally qualified health centers. And so that's been really wonderful. We've actually had drive-up shopping where people are literally in their vehicles and they're saying, you know, what they want from the car. So we're addressing the needs in that way. And that's allowed the people who otherwise wouldn't be getting their foods to those areas a way in which we've been able to do that.
I'm going to ask Karen, can you tell us about your work that moves communities, the food system, to resilience?
Well, you know, Dr. J mentioned the Chicago Region Food System Fund, and we launched that as a COVID response fund, and have awarded $3 point something, I can't remember the total amount, $1 million to 80 different organizations, from very small, like $5,000, up to $200,000 for larger collaborative projects. And these are prioritized for organizations led by people of color, and focused on both immediate response, but also the fund recognizes that we need to start working for long-term resilience, because people are developing so many new ways of doing things out of COVID. It's amazing. It's almost like this rapid cycle prototyping lab, like the design people talk about. Aasia could speak to this really well with what folks at the squad have learned and different organizations there. One of the things in terms of what Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan said is it would be really nice if we could just move that food and not have to dump it into the local community. However, our system is not set up for that. There aren't enough smaller meat processing plants to take all of the animals that the big, meat processors were having, and farmers who were dedicating those animals for those plants having to euthanize. We need to rebuild and build the kind of infrastructure that is more resilient. And so this is a little plug. On November 16th, we're going to be announcing another round of the Chicago Region Food System Fund funding that is focused on longer term resilience, not leaving COVID behind. We know that COVID is with us, very much with us still, but we know that people are also starting to apply some of what they've learned during this first phase post-COVID to new things, and they want to continue to build those things. So we want to create that opportunity. And we are not defining what resilience is, because we think that people have different ways of working for resilience, and we want actually to learn in a much more open process how people think about resilience, how they're going to act, how they're trying to build it in their communities. And we look forward to hearing from some folks about some very creative ideas going forward.
And I want to make sure that to put a real point on this, that Karen, you mentioned about meat processing workers especially. So I just checked the numbers, and as of, it's been 6 months, and 71,600 cases of COVID have happened in meat processing, and there's been 321 deaths. I think it's just really important for us to reflect on the massive cost to food chain workers, and especially people of color, that have been, and that has really impacted and speaks to the need for building a more redundant and resilient food system that doesn't, isn't centralized and really taking advantage of workers. So on that note, a lot needs to change to get to a resilient place. I would love to hear from each of you. What are some solutions to build resilience that you would like to hear from congressional candidates? And I'll give you a second, but I would love to hear from Karen first.
Well, I have to say, I would love to have them adopt all of the things that Illinois Stewardship Alliance put forward in the candidate survey, which was very comprehensive. It was terrific. And it actually led them, talk about leading questions, it led them into steps that they could take for SNAP benefits online, for land access, for support to Black farmers, for more infrastructure for local food. And I've been actually quite happy with some of the responses I read that the candidates are putting forward. And others, it's clear, just haven't even thought about it to the degree that they need to. And so ISA, kudos to you for putting it out there. We need this at both the federal and the local state levels. I think one of the things that we're in a constant state of innovation is about is, all right, so how do we make policy around climate resilience even more robust than it is? Get more support for cover cropping, more support for other kinds of farming techniques and technologies that will let us see just how well we're sequestering carbon. There's a lot of research that needs to be done, and we're quite happy also that a number of Fresh Taste members and other funders are supporting the Illinois Regenerative Agriculture Initiative at University of Illinois. So we'd love to have policymakers think about how they could support land-grant universities to partner with community partners around a research agenda that will really move resilience forward in all kinds of ways.
Aasia?
Yeah, I'll echo that about supporting what Illinois Stewardship Alliance has put out. And I would also, like to talk about, so with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, we have a program called the Good Food Purchasing Program, but it's a policy. It's a policy that redefines of how institutional and government procurement processes purchase food and the value systems for that. And so if we want to invest in resilient or invest in the infrastructure for a resilient food system, we have to understand the resources from the government level. And like for institutional purchasing, how are those, where are those resources going? And can it be redirected to local Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led farms and food and farm businesses? So Good Food Policy Act, and if you want to know more about what we call GFPP, you can go to our website, chicagofoodpolicy.com. We have information about all the value systems that we're trying to shift the culture of how institutions value food. And we're looking, we have partnerships with the Chicago public school system that we're developing, with the Chicago Park District that we're developing on how they purchase food for their programs, because we need to assess that. That's part of the equation for a resilient food system. I think that CFPEG is also, we're also thinking about models, like in the state of Michigan, they have the Good Food Fund. And I think having something like that here, which is a incentive for institutions to purchase locally. It's more than incentive, because it gives money to institutions that purchase locally. And then that goes to, you're building the capacity of these small growers that want to then step up and be able to provide more. But we have to see that investing in the local food shed is steps. A small grower is not going to be able to provide all this produce. It's not going to be able to produce all this produce at a large scale. We have to think and be positive about building the capacity and the long-term investment for these growers to be able to get to a point to feed people, and that different growers growing different crops, that it's not a monoculture, as we see with a lot of commercial ag here in the state of Illinois. But yeah, so I would say things like the Good Food Purchasing Policy and the Good Food Fund are examples of, I think, what is needed for a resilient food system. We need to shift the resources and money and invest in those that have been disinvested and under-resourced.
Yeah. And I want to encourage folks who are listening to follow the links in the chat, especially to learn about the Good Food Purchasing Policy. We really want values-based procurement. The fact is, there are millions of taxpayer dollars that go to purchasing food every single day. And if that was values-based instead of just the lowest price on the cheapest food, we'd be able to scale up and build the infrastructure for a local food system that we need for the kind of resilient food system of the future. That said, I would love to hear Dr. J and then Jen back to this question of what are some solutions to build resilience that you would like to hear congressional candidates talk about?
Well, I think as a farmer, where I'm seeing a lot of challenge and a rate limiting step is literally farm viability and the capacity, particularly of small farms, to even come together and aggregate their goods so that they can, in fact, supply the demand and the need for a large, population like the Chicagoland area or for the region. And so I think that far more efforts needs to be put on farm viability and building small farm capacity, particularly for Black farmers. I think we've struggled really hard to get to 0.2% of all farmers in the United States being Black, and we still have a long way to go. We have to be able to encourage and have more incentives for being able to encourage young folks to take up regenerative farming, and to be able to, as Karen had made mention, to be able to find ways that we can do regenerative farming on a much larger scale, so that carbon sequestering can occur. In addition, I had the honor with the Illinois Stewardship Alliance to speak with Senator Dick Durbin, and he had made mention of the hemp in particular. And we are licensed growers, and we were in the debacle, fiasco, whatever you want to call it, of taking on growing hemp. And we don't have any infrastructure here in the state of Illinois for food or any of the other 600 plus uses. And so I just think that there's a lot of infrastructure building around the distribution as well as the production side that's going to be really critical to get that support. So, in terms of us building the demand, from institutions, from businesses, from direct retail, but we need to be able to make certain that when that demand is there, the producers are able to supply, and there's this distribution logistics side that's been developed so that we can fulfill on the commitment.
And since you mentioned it, in his response to the voter guide, Senator Durbin said that he co-sponsored the Food Supply Protection Act to reimburse farmers who can package food directly to pantries, and for grants to smaller processors for storage and refrigeration upgrades that can diversify the concentrated processing supply chain. So we did hear that is one idea, the Food Supply Protection Act, that you can learn more about. We'll put a link to learn more about that, which is one of the pieces that we've been advocating for with members of Congress. Jen, what are some solutions you'd like to hear?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Food Supply Protection Act, because I think that would go a long way to help resolve a lot of the issues that producers are facing. I guess, I think, what's already been said about making our purchasing policies start from a place of what are our values and what is going to actually strengthen our communities in Illinois. And, so things like the Good Food Purchasing Policy are wonderful. I'd love to see that adopted. I think in a lot of folks who are making these choices at institutions and things like that are purchasing from a perspective of scarcity rather than a perspective of wealth and diversity. We actually have an amazing amount of growers growing an amazing amount of different things that I think when we're choosing based on our values, that will kind of play itself out in a way that would support our communities more. But I'd also love to see the SNAP Match Fund funded, and kind of pulling back a little bit and taking kind of a farther away view that I've seen all through this pandemic opportunities where governments and other entities who are offering resources or trying to help have been able to reduce the red tape. And this isn't a concrete thing necessarily that I can point to in one place, but that small businesses are struggling for time in a major way. So anytime that somebody who's in the position of creating policy that might open up opportunities like grants or things like that, or loans, that anytime they can reduce the red tape and make it more simple to get through that process, they're going to have a greater impact in our communities. Because I talk with farmers who have, first of all, been trying to wade through all of the various programs and all the various policies that entities are putting out there trying to help in COVID. And, when their dealing with all of the responsibilities of their families and their farms, and then they've got to go and do research on all of these programs and go apply for each one. It's an intense amount of time, and it's a huge ask. And I've talked personally to multiple farmers that have just said, I don't have the time. I need to sleep at some point. So that's not necessarily a concrete thing I can point to, but it's something I would love for people who are in a position to help, to really consider how can they make it easy for folks to access these resources.
First, Jen, you mentioned that that we have to get SNAP, and SNAP at farmers markets is especially really important to supporting local food producers. Mm-hmm. So I just want to mention that in her response, Representative Sherry Bustos said that moving forward, COVID relief must increase SNAP benefits. We have to limit the administration's rule to restrict those that can get SNAP benefits, which we've seen a lot of rollbacks of, and we need to ensure that USDA assistance is more equitably distributed, and that the department takes additional steps to strengthen and maintain regional and local markets. So for sure, SNAP is really important, and I heard a number of candidates say that we really need to increase SNAP. Dr. J, you mentioned that there were so few farmers of color, and I think that's really important if we're going to, build a resilient food system. We also need it to be equitable and diverse. Are there ways that we should or could increase land access for farmers of color? I'll put that out for whoever wants to jump in.
Okay. Well, being a farmer of color, I guess I'll take the stand here. One of the things that we've been doing at Black Oak Center is we've been, for 7 years now, we've been cultivating the next generation of Black farmers. So literally every year, our youngest apprentice is 14. And so there's an opportunity for our youth to be submerged into a growing season and get some sense of what it is to really produce, particularly in a rural setting where we're doing at minimum 10 acres of production and a variety of different types of production, including livestock. So it's a step beyond the garden and the limits, the space limits of urban production. For those who would be interested, and I just think that we need to be able to have more opportunities like that. Likewise, it's going to take a lot of innovation. It's going to take being able to do exchanges like we've done in the past, where elders still have land and it was farmed, and they want to have youth come and learn how to farm. And so there's this opportunity for those lands to be leased, or there would be an ultimate partnership or relationship or ownership. But at least the land is transferred to the current generation through relationship and training and support. So those are some of the things that we're working on right now, is garnering more land, creating land banks, doing all that we can to support land loss prevention. So no more Black farmlands here in Pembroke are continued to be taken due to tax delinquency, inheritance challenges, and for it to not be fallow and to return to being productive.
So if I could just add something, what I think is really interesting is that this, we're having a conversation about policy. And there's been, of course, a lot of federal policy that is contributed to land theft. But what we are seeing is the private people, and I'm not talking about just foundations, high net worth people. I'm talking about people who are looking around who may have found out on Ancestry.com that their family were slaveholders or original land thieves, who are really trying to think about, how do I give land back? Farmers in other states are having these conversations. And so I think that by creating a conversation around how to support another generation of farmers of color, as making amends, a justice strategy, that in a combination of building, in a sense, support for that among just all of us, that could help drive more people to try to influence policy in that direction who haven't been part of that conversation to date.
Doing this work for organizing for a just and regenerative food system and resilience is really hard. I'm curious, ladies, if you can tell me what gives you hope. So Aasia, let's start with you.
I like that question because I think it centers pleasure, talking about pleasure and joy. And my name, Aasia, means hope in Urdu. So first of all, thank you, Illinois Stewardship Alliance, for hosting these conversations, because I think conversations are key to bridge building and collaboration and trust building and relationships. But I think what gives me hope is understanding that we're all struggling, and that we're not alone, even though folks might feel like they're alone, but that you're not alone in your struggle. And sometimes when I'm checking in on people, it's like, yeah, how you doing? But it's like more like, how you struggling? Are you struggling okay? Because we all understand the fires in the backdrop. What gives me hope is the crew that I work with at the Chicago Food Policy Action Council. We're all like in it together, and support each other. And in other worlds, I'm also on the Leadership Council for Environmentalists of Color, and it's the same there as well. Seeing again, like I want to amplify again, like people like working at the First Nations Garden, Wilson and Pulaski, building this garden from nothing and as volunteers, that gives me hope. I have a 10-year-old son that has a beautiful imagination, and I'm humbled and thankful that I get to work from home and being able to grow with him and to have this like sort of precious time with him. That gives me hope. And that he is, he's learning from, remote learning, but, I just, I think I'm hopeful and thankful and have a lot of faith. I carry my ancestors with me. I come from very resilient, powerful grandmothers that worked so hard with their hands. I mean, grinding, from one side, grinding wheat every morning, and the other side grinding corn and making tortillas. So that grounds me. That brings me hope.
I love it. Jen, what gives you Aasia?
The land does. Every time I get the privilege to walk on is being farmed regeneratively, that has rich soil full of life and beautiful plants and animals growing out of it. I feel that I can see the almost want to say see the nutrition. I can see the the health and the vitality of those plants and animals. And so every time I get to eat that food, every time I get to walk onto that land, every time I have the opportunity to buy that food and to know that I'm voting with what I eat every day for the food system that I want to have. and for the privilege to do that. Not every place, especially not every rural place, has access to good quality food, which is counter to what you might think. Think rural folks would have great access to food because we have lots of space, but we don't often have that access. So I'm grateful for it. And I also have to say, every time my kid eats one of those carrots that's so sweet and she's so excited about it, and it's like a win on so many levels that it gets you through the day,
Dr. J, Karen? Oh, you're on mute. There we go.
Okay. What brings me hope is just in particularly being on this trolley and, seeing the young to the old and all different kinds of folk coming, men, women, children, people being grateful for having quality food in the community. And I want to put a shout out. I'd love to see Civ Pack show up tomorrow. We're going to be on the west side. We'll be doing it on the west side at 3711 Chicago Avenue with Blocks Together. And so, it's just been so wonderful to hear the thank yous, to look at the excitement and the happiness on people's faces, having the ability to have access to quality food at an affordable price. And of course, the children give me hope. Ezra, little 10-year-old, can't wait to get back to the farm, wants to run as soon as he gets to the driveway, the rest of the half mile, because he's to be there. So it's like there's a future. There's a future. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this.
Karen?
So, it's come out in everybody's statements. Who could have thought that when COVID hit and we went into lockdown and it was so dire, that people would also be experiencing joy. It is not joy of seeing that child's face who's so excited about getting good food, just joy in being able to overcome a barrier and figure out how to get food to people, to create a new business, to create a new way of doing things. And to me, that is so hopeful because it's really the human spirit rising to the occasion in very difficult circumstances. And if we can do that, we can do it in even better circumstances. And I think what I'm really hopeful about is that we will take the energy of stepping up with the mutual aid or associations, exemplify, and take that into the next phase of our work.
We're running short on time, but I really also want to get to this last and really important question, which is, why is it important to be a food and farm voter? And I'm going to put it back to you, Karen.
Oh my gosh, I have to say, I was lucky enough to attend the second party when Barack Obama was elected. And I was, where the media were asking people questions. And what they said, why are you glad that he was elected? I said, because now we're going to get some better people at USDA, or we're going to continue some of the work that's happening there. It is so important for people to recognize that these votes are not just about COVID-19 and the rest. They really are about the food system. And they're about who gets put into USDA positions. And they're about what the legislature at the state level puts forward with the scope that they have. So we really have to see every vote as a food vote, as well as an education, housing, healthcare vote.
Karen's so right. It's important for us to ask these questions and keep asking them. That's why I'm so grateful for ISA to be having put together this voter guide and to be holding these conversations, because our elected officials need to know this is that important to us, that I can't think of many things that are more important than our food. There's a few out there, but it's right up there at the top for the health of our whole community, all of our communities. So it's important to be a food and farm voter because they need to hear from squeaky wheels. They have squeaky wheels in their ears all day long, and they need to hear from the voters that this matters to us. This is something we're paying attention to. If they don't think we're paying attention, they're not going to, most of them probably won't make choices in our best interest. So we need to let them know what our best interests are.
Aasia, then Dr. J.
Yeah, so it's important to be a food and farm voter because, you know, food is at the center of conviviality, of how we come together, how we nourish our bodies and our souls and our spirits. And food is also holds like ancestral archives of old ways of doing and taking care of each other. And farming is just the way in which we are in a healthy and harmonious relationship with the land and the earth. So I think that this is why it's important. Like, this is truly important for our way of connecting, for our way of being healthy, and for the way in which we care for this earth.
Dr. J.
It's important to be a farm eater voter because our humanity depends on it. And that's been the greatest gift of COVID. While we've lost hundreds of thousands, those of us who are still here, we have a wonderful opportunity to deepen and heighten our humanity and our ability to care for each other. Not only is there the actual economics and the politics, the policy side, but there's literally the energetics of when I put my vote down, as Jen said, with both the food and I go into the booth, I am literally, along with others, making a strong stand for continuing with our humanity, the caring of each other, the sharing of this food, this local food. I mean, it's very powerful that, you know, all of us can eat from a place where people are passionate about growing the best quality food. That can only be good for us in many ways, in a holistic way. And so I'm encouraging everyone to make certain that they place their ballot with whom and what that's going to allow us to rise from all of this, all the stronger and all the better. And food is an essential part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. We're voting for our humanity. That is so powerful. Thank you all so much for being here and for everyone following during your lunch hour today. You deserve to know where candidates for Congress stand on these issues. And as Jen said, when you care about these issues, we're holding them accountable to do something. So please view the voter guide before you cast your vote in 1 week on Tuesday, November 3rd or earlier. You can find it at ilstewards.org/2020 voter guide. You can also check out the archive of this Eat, Drink, Vote series with recordings from each Facebook Live at ilstewards.org/Eat, Drink, Vote. Before we end our last Eat, Drink, Vote series, I want to thank the folks behind the scenes who made this production possible, especially our communications coordinator, Piero Tycho, and the rest of our team, Molly, Liz, Kathleen, and Angie. And I want to thank many Alliance members who powers this work. To learn more and become a member of Illinois Stewardship Alliance, visit ilstewards.org/join. And thanks again for tuning in. Thank you, ladies, so much for your time today. I look forward to working together to build a more resilient food system.
Thank you.
Thank you.